Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, guys. We are the group 4, Nurbaiti Janatin and Rekina Ratna. Let's start our discussion today about interlanguage pragmatic. Before we start, I will explain the tables of contents of this text. The first one definition is pragmatic transfer from L1 to L2. Learner language. In this part, I will show the history of the researchers and learners language study, developmental stage of pragmatic development, interlanguage relaxation strategies. For this part, we will discuss about referential communication, academic speech event, pragmatic markers, and then the influence of third language, and the last part is limiting factor on ELP development. First one is the definition of ELP. Interlanguage refers to intermediate, dynamic, and transient linguistic system that, according to the theory, continue to develop over time as learners move closer and closer to attaining native-like proficiency. The interlanguage is a rhetoric system at the early stage of development. Next is the main point. The main point the first is interlanguage is a type of language or linguistic system used by second and foreign language learners who are in the process of learning the target language. Or interlanguage pragmatic is the study of how non-native speakers acquire, understand, and use linguistic patterns or speech act in the second language. This interlanguage pragmatic focuses attention on learners of second or foreign language and their pragmatic development as they seek to become proficient, successful users of the target language. The main point with the interlanguage concept is that learner language use is informed by an underlying system or other systems that overlap and are constantly being revised by learners. Usually, out of awareness, as long as there is regular exposure and tutor learning, their thought is not random and can inform researchers and teachers about its LA developmental stage for curriculum and materials planning. The goals of ELB is essentially interest in how also learners use their developing abilities in the target language to communicate successfully despite gaps in knowledge about the linguistic system and about the social pragmatics of the L2. In other words, to interact in L2, learners need not only to have a yet to be behind the level of proficiency regarding the phonology, lexics, and syntax, but also the norms of communicating pragmatics meaning in the L2. Okay, next is the pragmatic transfer from L to the L1 to L2M. One feature of learner language that researchers and teachers are particular interest in is the transfer from L2 into comprehension and production of the L2. From this case, LLP, the focus is on learner of L2, that is the type of error and mistake, possible causes, and the effect of pragmatic development. Further, the linguistic basic of transfer in pragmatic has not been full and established, despite the recognition of researchers, teachers, and learners of second language that this phenomenon is a part of language learning and use. Conventional and conversational implicators are particularly difficult types of pragmatic meaning for learners, involving such as topic and attribution of illusionary force and perception of politeness. This is an example. A learner of Japanese who need to make a request for information and help At once of the work officers of a city or government in Japan achieve that goals more successfully and appreciably by having the knowledge that a negative word required requires is preferred to other form requires in Japan. Let me show the example, but I can read it. You can read by yourself. And also in Mexican Spanish, use of imperfect of caer with requests in perfect. And according to Carson and Blum, the main reasons for difficulty in enacting pragmatic knowledge derive from either insufficient knowledge of the target language, its communicative practice, a problem in the association with automaticity in real time, and interactional context. And then second is learner's language. In this part is very important source of information or pragmatic development is a learner language. That is the production of learners that has evidence of errors, mistakes, self-style, hesitation, refreshing, silence, and so forth. And by analyzing learners' production, teachers can diagnose the progress learners in their classes are making as well as derive ideas for future lesson plans, even whole semester worth of lesson plans. And the next is about the resume of study by the researchers in America, that is constructive analysis. Constructive analysis during the period of behaviorism and audiolingual method of language teaching in 1960 in the USA, comparing system of L1 with those of the L2 and developing teaching materials was a salient feature of language education during that period. And for the in the 70s, error analysis was the next stage in the developing L2 proficiency as research had shown that constructive analysis didn't produce the verb for the result in the classroom. So, rather than carry out comparison studies of two languages to find the area of difficulty, error analysis began to play a major role. And mean it entailed looking at learners produced in the L2 in the classroom context. The current stage of affairs has evolved from that start, and the learner language has become a much more sophisticated tool for teachers. Another possible explanation derives from the distinction that is made between error and mistake. If indeed the student has not been taught at all or inadequately about the third person singular form, then the learner is likely to be making an error. And then, while studying learner's language may most often be a tool to assess grammatical, lexical, and phonological progress, that accuracy of student in instituted SLR environments. Studies now de-emphasize learners' errors or mistakes and focus on how researchers can not only learn about interlanguage development, but also better to understand the stage of language learning and the exploratory nature of the learner language to ultimately inform more comprehensive theories about second language learning. A mature in the step in SLA and in LLP research transfer in the 80 when the interactional studies took on greater importance with Lang's interaction hypothesis. He argued that conversational interaction was a necessary condition for the SLA. Then in the 1996 Long's revised view on interaction hypothesis implies the need for modified form on interaction. Clearly, any discussion of interaction overlap with pragmatics. Interactional discourse is the primary context where pragmatics meaning form. In the next slide, example about ELP talking academic context. In this example, includes two language learners using L2 English to enforce target speech acts during a two-picture comparison text of an American home. This is about the student Antonio and Rodrigo, the both brothers and native Spanish speaker from Mexico who are studying in the same intensive English program at US University. And there is a example about their uh, speech. And the last part from me is developmental stage of pragmatic. Interlanguage pragmatic derives from the notion that learners move to developmental stage as they make progress toward L2 pragmatic norms. On the basis of their work with second language learners, researchers such as Pineman, Johnson, Bradley, Dockley claim that developmental sequences found in learner language are very similar to those of children acquiring the target language as their L2. I will show the example of another researcher from Blackburn and Spada. Yeah, this is the part of speech and relative clause from Blackburn and Spada. Can you see? And then, however, the existence of stage for primitive development is under researched. Casper and Ross revive more recent studies of developmental sequence. Gestalt attempts a theoretical account comparing children and adults' acquisition of social use of language. Casper and Smith state the pragmatic competence is an area of communicative competence which is closely tied to cognitive ability and social experience in any language, alone or others. And the one researchers, Ben L. Kulka, explained that they found the three phases of developing pragmatic competence in student language, which discuss competence outside of syntax knowledge. There's the three phases. The first one is reliance on situational cues in the infer illusionary power, differentiation of alternatives, realization and transport evidence from L2, L1, and the last is native speaker norms estimate, but continue to display a transfer of in cultural elements. And another example of the complex requirements of enacting pragmatic competence in the lakehold of developmental stage is observed in the use of modality subsystem of English frequently employed to signal pragmatic meaning. The distinctions in English have fuzzy, overlapping boundaries with those in other languages, and consequently, the area of modality tends to provide evidence of cross-pragmatic transfer as well. This evidence suggests as developmental sequence, where the appropriate use of modality comes only after learners have consolidated other skills regarding communicating professional and pragmatic meanings. That's all for me. We go to the next speakers, that is Mbak Regina.
Okay, the next topic is interlanguage realization strategies. The main focus of ILP until the 1990s was on linguistic actions, specifically individual realization strategies to communicate pragmatic meaning of learners. Bergman and Casper in 1993 looked at apologies as speech acts to compensate for offenses the hearer had experienced as a result of some behavior by the speaker. In other words, apologies may be offered for real offending behavior such as stepping on someone's feet while attempting to find a seat at a movie theater, or be only virtual if behavior that the hearer might only regard as offensive, such as passing in front of someone at a crowded party. A typical a typical virtual or ritual apology in American English is the use of "excuse me," where the purpose is more to maintain interactional or social harmony and to display one's efforts to abide by the local social norms. It contrasts with "I'm really sorry," that may be used again in American English for a more serious offense to the hearer, such as when the speaker has been very late for an appointment or forgot to telephone about an important matter. All societies perform both forms of apology. And then next we have referential communication. As an interactive feature of talk discussed in Chapter 2, reference entails pragmatic meanings. It is also an aspect of language use that depends on careful decisions by speakers regarding linguistic forms. So, for example, if a speaker asks a listener to pass the book, when there are several books on the desktop, it is unclear which of the several books the speaker is referring to. The speaker assumes that the listener has enough old or given information in the context to know which book the speaker wants to examine. However, in the case of also learners of English, particularly if their primary language does not include a subsystem of indefinite and definite articles in example a, an, the, and sometimes that or this, as English does, they may not have enough pragmatic knowledge of English to understand which linguistic form is needed in this case. Here is the example that illustrates the referential function in talk among native English speakers. B1 said, "So this other lady who was on the phone wouldn't know. What color hair did the lady with the telephone, did she have? Long brown hair. Brownish sort of." In this excerpt of talk, the bolded words indicate the efforts on the part of the interlocutors to settle on a description of a third person being talked about, who all of them know. Thus, they are referring to given information so that A1 can infer just who B1 and B2 are referring to. The next is academic speech event. Faculty advisors have a higher status within the university than students do. At the same time, graduate students in U.S. institutions are expected to demonstrate independent thinking by arriving for the advisement session with knowledge about the schedule of classes and a plan of action for the courses they want to take for the next semester. Thus, the dilemma for the students is to acknowledge the advisor's status while at the same time taking the initiative. This use of language requires careful use of congruent speech. Both participants should perform the expected roles for students and advisors using status-preserving linguistic forms and the appropriate timing of their turns at talk. Schifrin in Discourse Markers provides a list of discourse or pragmatic markers in American English with commentary and textual examples as well as definition, often cited in research work on this topic of pragmatics. The basic definition states that pragmatic markers have three features. They are grammatically optional and independent of the utterance. If they are removed from an utterance, the meaning remains the same. They are also semantically pledged, that is, they have little or no propositional meaning. Finally, they carry out textual and interpersonal functions. No one list of pragmatic markers is complete. Very common ones in American English are in addition to you know, you like, I mean, like, and they can be combined as in like, you know, like. For example, this is the dialogue between A and B. I'm having a really hard time getting my daughter to do her homework. Well, maybe if you sit down with her, help her a little, she might get motivated. In this example, has functions as mitigation device and a signal that B is inviting as a reaction to the suggestion. And then influence of third languages. Pragmatic competence development is dependent on the complex ability to use phonological cues, including prosodic features such as stress and intonation, rules of the grammatical system, and knowledge of social appropriateness norms. However, this description is deceptive. It presents a simplistic view of the SL learner. Researchers have challenged the view that such aspects of ILB as transfer from the L1 to the L2 are always unidirectional. Cook concentrated on a perspective that sees the learner not through the eyes of native speaker pragmatic norms, but rather as a multidimensional individual with multi-competencies. Further, pragmatic realization strategies are not only influenced by the social norms of the first language. Other languages a speaker may know can create an unexpected use of language that reflects more than L1 influence. A plurilingual speaker may modify, for example, the degree of directness and indirectness in making requests according to the norms of another culture and language rather than their L1. Their communicative resources may have become influenced due to residence abroad over a number of years, particularly if they have proficiency in several languages. And then the next is limiting factors on ILP development. Pragmatic competence develops where learners can enact a variety of social roles. Rather than restricting participation to answering teachers' questions or responding to set prompts by peers, students need to practice asking questions, eliciting information, and engaging in a variety of speech acts in such activities as role plays, simulations, debates, and other tasks. The opportunities to use the target language in situations that approach real-world conversations are limited. In addition, teachers of the second or foreign language may lack the meta-pragmatic awareness and knowledge of the target language to help learners develop their L2 pragmatic competence. Many teachers of a foreign language may themselves feel at loss as they may not be native speakers of the language or may not have the proficiency level or have experienced sufficient periods of exposure to the L2 pragmatics to be able to develop lessons to help their learners.